husband and their children, aged 8 and 3, and a cousin aged 12, and he says they need the hostages back now at any price. Joining me now is Hannah Weisfeld. She is founder of Yachad. It's a British Jewish organisation that advocates for a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you very much for being with us. Just explain, first of all, if you would, what your organisation does.
We're a British Jewish organisation. We work within the community here and within Parliament to build support for a political resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So we are trying to elevate the voices of the mainstream of the British Jewish community who supports resolving this conflict through the creation of an independent Palestinian state and end of occupation.
You'll have heard many of the families that we've had on my programme through the week. We spoke to them at great length, who feel abandoned. And they're marching because they feel that Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't have their best interests at heart. What would you like to see happen next?
Well, what's happened to those families is that it's actually taken weeks for the government of Israel to even pay much attention to them. So when their family members were first taken hostage, it actually took those the families of the victims to do public press conferences to get any kind of attention from the government at all. And it's certainly the case that there is a sense amongst those families that there is no political strategy here, and that the military strategy does not seem to be one that is considering the outcome for their family members, which we assume are somewhere in tunnels under the Gaza Strip. And so really what they are trying to do by marching is to put those 250 hostages into the centre of the discussions about how this war gets conducted. Because as things stand, there is almost no clarity that the government is even considering their well-being in how they move forward with the military campaign in Gaza.
You'll be aware of the reports earlier in the week that there is this deal in the offing. The supposed details of what is being negotiated is that there would be a 3 or a 5 day pause in exchange for 50 of the women and children who are being held. Again, no response to that. But what would you say about some of these negotiations that the Qatari government are leading?
Well, look, there are many reasons why we need a pause in this fighting. There is no way those hostages will come out unless the fighting is paused. And there is just no way that you could get any level of humanitarian aid into Gaza to support the Palestinian people of Gaza without a stop in the fighting. And, you know, I just listened to Lieutenant Peter Lerner talking about the fuel coming in and out. The conversations that I've had with aid agencies who are on the ground in Gaza is that they literally can't transport aid from A to B. So you have a situation where you stop the fighting for a few hours. It's not just about the fuel, but it's also about the length of time when the road infrastructure is completely destroyed to move aid across the whole area. So both for the sake of those hostages and for the sake of the millions of people in Gaza who don't have access to basic necessities to survive, it's our opinion that it's absolutely essential that the fighting has got to stop temporarily and ideally long term in order to find a way to deal with the immediate needs, but also that ultimately there is no military resolution to this conflict.
Yeah, I think the confusion obviously is the interpretation of what this limited amount of fuel is being used for. And from UNRWA representatives today, they say it's going towards pumping water and sewage, and what they need is, of course, fuel to move the aid, as you say. Look, we're looking at these pictures. These are live pictures, incidentally, from Tel Aviv. Thousands of people outside Prime Minister Netanyahu's office tonight. When you reflect on this march, and I'm sure you know people who are on the march and have been on the march on the last few days, how does it affect you as a British Jewish woman? I'm just interested in your personal thoughts about it all.
Look, the atmosphere in the UK is incredibly difficult at the moment. And the way that the kind of conversation has developed here is that we have this concept of a zero-sum game, which is that you either care about those hostages, those Israeli hostages, some of whom are not citizens of Israel, some of whom are not Jewish Israelis, under the ground in Gaza, or you care about the people of Gaza, and that you can't do both. And that if you raise concerns about the people of Gaza, that you are willing to sacrifice those 250 people, and vice versa. If you raise concerns about those 250 people, you don't care about the people of Gaza. And we have just got to move beyond that. You know, when I look at some of those victims, Israeli victims, some of whom I knew, and some of whom are, the great irony of this whole thing is that the Israelis that were murdered and taken hostage on October the 7th were largely from the peace and human rights camp in Israel, not exclusively, but that border community is full of peace activists, and that is the world in which I move in Israel, and the circles that we have and the colleagues we have come from those communities. And it devastated the peace camp in Israel October the 7th. And when I look at those people, people that I know and people that could, the children that look like my kids, it's very hard to look at that and not be affected by that. But this idea that as a Jew, you don't also look at the people of Gaza and also see, the devastation there and want to call for something different. That we have polarized this to such a great extent now, and there will not be a long-term resolution to this conflict unless Israelis have security and unless Palestinians have dignity and freedom. And at the moment, it seems that we are operating in an environment where everybody's doing as much as possible to destroy both sides of that equation. And until we can bring the people, start a political process urgently that deals with those two things, there won't be an end to this conflict. There may be a pause in the fighting, but the conflict will continue.
We need plenty more voices like that, I have to say, Hannah, because at the moment a lot of people will look at this and we're in just this vicious cycle of violence and people can't see an end to it. Just very quickly, finally, what would you hope would come out of, I've only got a minute actually, what would you hope would come out of this if there is a ceasefire? What should happen next?
Well, I think the international community, the US, the Arab world, the EU and the UK need to start a political process urgently. There cannot be a ceasefire without a political process. It is only that process that will bring a long-term resolution. So we can talk about immediate needs, but there needs to be a simultaneous conversation going on right now about what the long-term kind of future is here.
Hannah, thank you for coming on the programme and sharing your thoughts. Just to say that 4-day march is now at an end in Tel Aviv. Thousands of people outside the office of Benjamin Netanyahu tonight. We will see whether the pressure that they're bringing to bear, whether that forces a change in Israeli policy.